You are listening to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, episode 117, Difficulties with Delays Between Game Sessions. In today's episode, I discuss the topic of delays between game sessions. I talk about how unforeseen delays between game sessions can slow down or ruin a game. I also propose some solutions for dealing with the problem. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and today I'm going to be talking about the difficulties with delays between game sessions. But first, some updates about the podcast. So this episode is going to be dropping a little bit early if you're hearing it. It's going to be dropping on Monday, 6/6, and that is because, once again, I am going to be on vacation all the way through all of next week. So the podcast will return with a new episode on Wednesday, 6/22. It's a little bit of a delay, so you're just short one episode, but I'll be out for that trip. There is also the possibility that towards the end of July, early August, I will be on a work trip. And if that is the case, there will probably not be an episode that week as well. Again, things come up. Actually sort of relates to the topic that I'm going to be talking about today. Also, there are some odd problems with the comments on Tom's first episode on Facebook. For whatever reason, I cannot access the comments on that first episode, 115. So I saw some comments, and I can't actually review or reply to the comments, but just wanted to acknowledge that I did see them. We're happy to have Tom on board and hope you're enjoying that content. We'll have him on for more episodes coming up. So on to the main topic here, which is going to be difficulties with delays between game sessions. And I can't remember if I've talked about this with Jared before, or maybe coming back from like a long break before, but hey, you know what? There's like 100 episodes of this podcast, so you're going to get some sort of duplicate topics here and there. And this is sort of something that's plaguing my table right now with Jared and Brian. And the reality is that, you want a consistent game schedule. Our goal is to try to game every week. I don't know how long it's going to continue into the future, if we're going to be able to maintain that pace. It's sort of starting to transition without anybody saying anything to more of an every other week thing. But who knows, we might get in a groove, start hitting a couple or 3 out of 4 weeks, stuff like that. But the truth is that, that consistent schedule is the best for it, because you have everybody kind of always in this ebb and flow of I just left the game and now I know when to anticipate my next game. So the schedule for it is really important, whether it be every week, every other week, once a month. It's important because it brings up that level of anticipation where the event is going to be happening, and your players can then start thinking about the game, and you as the GM can sort of get yourself in the mode to be able to tell the game as well. When the game is erratic and all over the place, it becomes much, much harder to tell a good story, because there is so much more there's so many more hurdles that you have to overcome every game session to get people back into the situation. So the consistent schedule is the key. We found that once a week was the best schedule for us, and when you're hitting it once a week, it's a really good thing. But my real anticipation of it is, if you could just even set it up as once every other week, it would still be a very good thing, because the consistency of the schedule is more important than the frequency at which you do the gaming experience. I've gamed multiple days in a row, and it's the same sort of thing, but I think it's the anticipation of knowing the next game is what really kind of helps with that. So that's the perfect world, obviously, is to set up a gaming schedule. But the reality is that life just kind of gets in the way. The last couple of weeks, there's a holiday, so everyone was busy with stuff during the holiday weekend, and then there was Brian had to move a friend, and the week before that Brian was sick. There's so many things that get in the way. So I can't fault anyone for, not being able to make it to a game, but throwing things out of the loop, it makes it harder for you to remember where you were and where you're going, or like what you were doing in the game. And so, again, that's why I say the consistent schedule is the best schedule, which, solves the problem at hand. But since you're not going to have the perfect world where you've got players every single week, and, God forbid that you as the GM have to take a week off, it's impossible to get in 52 or 26 consistently. Sorry, I shouldn't say it's impossible. I'm sure there are gaming groups that, rain or shine, come hell or high water, they do that. I remember I throw a Super Bowl party every year, and the wife of one of my friends came to my Super Bowl party, and I said, "Where's your husband?" And she goes, "Oh, he plays Shadowrun on Sundays." And I'm like, "It's the Super Bowl. Like, couldn't you have just couldn't you just come to the party?" And she's like, "No, you don't understand. He plays Shadowrun on Sundays, and he plays Shadowrun every Sunday. They don't miss a Sunday." So I'm like, okay. So I'm sure there are groups out there who are like, we don't miss. We never miss that scheduled game, or we make something happen with those who are available during the times that you don't have the scheduled game. That kind of brings me on to my solutions and kind of best practices for this problem that every table will encounter at some point in time. And the first solution, and the one that I think most people who say, like, I'm hellbent, we're going to run this every Sunday, okay, or every Saturday, or whatever day it is, the way that you can successfully run that every single time is to run with the amount of people that you have. Now, I will argue that this is an easier thing to do with a larger gaming table, because if you drop a couple players, it's not as detrimental as if you have, 2 players at your table or 3 players at your table and you lose a player. Losing a player can screw up the whole thing. With 2 or 3 people at the table, you almost want to have a full party anytime that you tell the story, because it's so much missed in a smaller table, just given the nature of how they kind of run and work, which is everybody has more screen time, more play time with the GM. The turns are quicker. We talked about last week, or we talked about with Tom on his introduction episode. He said, running that 3-person table is probably the ideal table, because you're able to give focus to all the different people at your table. When you start getting into that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, player tables, and I've heard people run 16 player tables. When you start getting that large, the turns become a group activity less so than the individual turn order activity. And so, when you have a larger group, because the group operates more as a big blob, as a party moving in a single direction, you're able to actually, run with one less player. Now, some tables won't do that, but the reality is the more players that you have at the table, the more likely it is that you're going to have conflicts with different people who are at the table, meaning that not everybody's going to be able to show up every week. And even if you set up a, every other week sort of thing, not everybody's going to be able to show up every other week. There's just so many things that go on with life that the bigger your table is, the more likely you're going to like 1 or 2 people drop out every week. Now, if you have people who are consistently dropping out, that's a different situation than what I'm talking about here. This would be just, 1 week it's Steve, the next week it's Becky, and then, you have a full table, and then a full table, and then you drop another player. Like that's what you can do. Now the problem that arises when you run with less people at the table, although it's a fine solution, I'm not telling you to avoid it. The thing you have to be aware of is that if you run with less people at the table, okay, then other people are not going to be getting as much XP. That sort of is alleviated in the D&D system with the milestone system, being able to give you more. You get XP for achieving the goals more so than you get XP for doing certain things and being available at the specific time. So you don't unbalance your party that way if you go the milestone XP, but if you're going and giving individual rewards in game, individual loot in game, and you're not compensating for the missing player at the time, because maybe you're spiteful, maybe you are upset that Steve misses games more frequently than other people at the table. You're basically then unbalancing your table, and you're making your job even harder later on. If you know that things come up, you might as well just accept the fact that if I'm going to run with less people, these ones are on autopilot, or I'm able to bring these players equal loot and equal rewards at the end of the session. Maybe not maybe not completely equal. Maybe because you're not distributing spotlights and things like that. But if it's equipment and if it's experience that's necessary to keep them in pace with the game, just give them the equipment and the experience. You maybe don't have to give them the gold. Again, what good is gold at some point? Gold is such a useless currency in D&D after a certain point. And at some point money isn't a good currency. We did an episode when I was doing this with Jared on currency and just how you kind of get past that. But if you're giving out loot or magic items or something like that as part of the completion of the dungeon or whatever you're working on, it's very easy to just say these are the ones that were rolled for this person, and they now have those magic items. Because it's going to make your life that much easier on the other side. And again, if you have people who will miss consistently, that's a different story. That's when you got to be going the route of talking to them and saying, maybe this isn't the right time for you to be playing the game. Maybe you can't make the game, all that other stuff. So, but again, that's probably the most common solution, is to just run with less people. That's not a solution that works for our table, for me, Jared, and Brian, unfortunately, because when one of us is missing, okay, specifically if the GM's missing, there's nothing you can do unless your friends want to get together and story tell their own game. Maybe you give them the podcast, say, hey, look at this. When I'm not here, you can do like a one shot or something. Have a good time. Learn how to GM, so the next time we tell a game, you can do it. Otherwise, they're basically screwed. So when one person bows out in a smaller table, the entire table kind of falls in on itself. My suggestion would be, if you do know that you are not going to be able to make a game, just tell people early and often, especially if you have a scheduled thing, something that happens at a consistent time every week. It's not a big deal. Like I said, life gets in the way for everybody. Things happen all the time for everybody. And, it makes the blow less intense or less frustrating. It gives you more time to be able to make other plans for the week. So, always try to talk about that stuff earlier. Obviously things come up and, some stuff is unavoidable, but you always want to move in that direction. So let's say that you end up having more consistent fallouts week to week. So your schedule's every week, and you have more consistent fallouts week to week. So you're just noticing that the week to week schedule just isn't working anymore, because just about every other week you're breaking and you're not able to run a game. And in that case, I would suggest proposing a new consistent game schedule. So if it's every other week, maybe just the evolution of your game table, the age of your players, the duties with their families, what have you, has now dictated that every other week is the right gaming schedule. There's nothing that says you can't come back to a weekly schedule, but for the time being, every other week is going to be the schedule that you're going to go to, or every month is going to be the schedule that you go to. It's important to have, the recognition of the frequency at which things are happening and the ability to change your schedules for your players. Because again, what you want to get to is the consistent schedule for the game. And the reason why is going to come in the next thing, which is no matter what you do, whether you game every week, whether you game every 2 weeks, whether you game every month, whether you game every 2 months. Once you get to 2 months, that's a harder. You're telling different types of games. But if you're doing like a campaign week to week, bi-weekly, whatever that is, not bi-weekly, bi-weekly is the frequency I'm looking for there. You're going to need to start writing down detailed recaps. You don't win points for telling your players to keep detailed notes and then expect them to know what's going on. And this is really important, especially in the world of, breaks in the game, like unforeseen breaks in your consistent schedule. Consistent schedules make this less of a necessity, although I would still argue to have it with a consistent schedule. And that is because your players are thinking about the next session. So they're not so divorced from the idea of what's going on with game. And they're thinking about, they already knew what they kind of wanted to do next, and now you're giving them time to formulate that plan. And so the consistent schedule lets your players always sort of know when the next game is, when I need to be ramping up and thinking about my next moves, what I'm going to do next. But if you are not getting that consistent week-to-week schedule, or let's say a game falls off, now you've got that extra month where you now are like between your game and you're totally not focused on what was happening or where you were going. And so with Jared's game that he's running right now, for example, the game centers around these cult members, and we've taken a case, and we're I'd say maybe halfway through the story, as it would be, or we're in the meat of the story at this point, but we don't remember what we were necessarily doing the last time we met because we've had so much time off, and we don't remember really kind of our motivations or our directions that were pulling us in the game, because we're now separated by a lot more time between that. And, every time that we've tried to anticipate coming up to the game, it's harder to then revivify that level of excitement that you had in the moment that you left the last game, and to be able to come back in with the same level into the next game because you've missed so many of them. And that's really the problem when you drop off the consistent schedule. Or if you have an inconsistent gaming schedule where it's just kind of like, okay, well, let's just kind of throw it together and figure out when everybody's ready to do game. My friend Josh, he runs a game on Sunday nights, and his group is an inconsistent gaming group. They fall off for long periods of time, and then they have to come back. And so this is why you need to have the detailed recap. And even with a detailed recap, expect the speed up to like being involved in the game to be slower when you get into like the height of the game. So if your game session's short, like a 2-hour game session, that detailed recap better be super detailed. I mean, the onus is on the GM at that point to really bring everybody back in and focus everybody back on the game at hand, because the players are sort of all over the place. You've let all the chickens out of the coop, and they're running all over the place. Okay, you're trying to put them all back in line and get them back focused in on the game, and kind of refocus their efforts to the game itself. And so knowing exactly where you were, this is what you guys were thinking about doing. I mean, that's really important for you to write down as a GM at the end of your game session. If you know the directions the players are going, jot down a couple notes. Be like, players are thinking about doing this. Players are thinking about doing this. Players are thinking about doing this. Okay. They're thinking about pursuing the count. They're thinking about talking to this person. You're thinking about doing this, because your players won't remember that. Okay. And yes, there's a failure of your players. The players should remember their plans and what they want to do, but it is also just the reality of the time that you guys are separated from the table at that point. And being separated from the game, your players, because they don't know the story, they don't know where it's going, they're now even more detached from the event of gaming, and you still know everything that needs to happen in your game. It's like the curse of being a GM, is that because you know everything that has to happen, you believe the players are just as invested sitting there going, I know what I need to do next. And with more and more time that sits between that, your players lose those things. It's just so much stuff is going on in their life, and it's hard to remember things as it is, and to remember every little detail about game is tough. So you should be doing it in two ways. You should encourage your players to take notes, okay, because that is a good practice for players to have. I don't say the players shouldn't take notes. All right, the players should take a level of notes that is useful enough that the players don't have to look at you every time they talk to an NPC and go, who is that person that I talked to last and what did they say? You're not dictating back. Like, can you read me back the last 20 minutes of game, please? That's not your job as the GM. Okay. The players need to have enough notes to remember what they did 20 minutes ago. The players need to have enough notes to remember some important details along the way. And you need to, again, there's sort of a balance there that you need to find, which is have them take enough notes that they're not constantly asking you to basically dictate the last 20 minutes. You're not a stenographer reading back the court proceedings or whatever in front of you. But you aren't there also to then say like you don't remember this super important detail and I'm not going to tell you. So you have to find a balance between that. You have to break a good balance between that in game. But when you're separating between games, especially the longer that you've got a delay between games, super duper helpful to, write up a little blurb about what the players did, where they were, where they're thinking about going. It takes you probably 5 minutes to write that up. Okay. And it would probably take you 5 minutes at the end of your game session to write that up when everybody leaves and you're all done chit-chatting and talking. And then be able to give that back to the players, and then let the players then rely upon their more detailed notes that they have about their plans. Because again, they might have a note and they might not remember why they wrote down, ask Cheryl about the bread. Okay. Because they don't remember what happened in the last session. And you're like you went to Cheryl, to the baker, and you talked to her, and you did that because at the scene of the crime there were breadcrumbs everywhere from fresh baked loaves and a bag that said Cheryl's Bakery. And then now they are able to put together their notes and it all starts to sort of make sense. And if you give them a good enough recap, what you want to hear is, oh yeah, okay, I remember what we were doing now. I remember where we were going. That's when you know that everything's clicking back into place, the gears are moving, and we're now moving in the right direction. We're able to start at least doing game. Okay. But again, the delay is super tough there, even with the detailed recap. Expect that the longer of a delay that you have between your games, the less likely, especially if they're interrupted by inconsistent delays, meaning that your consistent schedule fell apart, that you are going to be less likely to have the players just jump back into the story and be like, all right, let's do this. We know exactly what we're doing. There's going to be more screwing around. There's going to be more silliness at the table. It's going to be more joking at the table. There's going to be more silence at the table. It's going to be all of that put together. And unfortunately, I don't have a really great remedy besides keeping the detailed recap and then just trying to keep people on direction. At that point, you sort of need to become the mediator, which is if your players look stumped, if your players look like they're slowing their way into something, or if they're way off track, you want to try to keep guiding them back into the game. Guiding, I say, not forcing. Because if you force the players back into the game and they're just not present or ready, the players will not respond generally and push away. And we've talked about that on this podcast several times before. So again, these are challenges that every table faces. And again, if I've talked about this on the podcast before, which I think we have, I'm recalling some of these points brought up. Maybe it was under a different context, but just because it's happening right now to my table, it's something that is easy to express. How do we get back into the game? And even right now, as I sit here thinking and dictating and talking to you on this podcast, I'm having trouble remembering what we were doing in the game. And I think we were in the middle of like something more action packed or stealthy. And so it's even more important to remember when we get there. So it's going to be really, really heavily put on Jared to get us back in the, not just recapped in the game, but to get us put back in the mood to play and reset the tone and the mood of the scene. That is equally challenging in and of itself. I guess I'll end it on that note, which is that the last piece that you need to do is you need to reset the mood from where the players were. If you can't reset the mood from where the players were, it's like the worst place that you can be, because it's so hard to get the players to come back into it. You think it makes a great cliffhanger, but like if you just scared the players or like left the players on something really suspenseful, okay, and you had built up a lot of tension to get you there, and you go, okay, we'll talk to you next week. The players are going to be like, damn it, I want to know what's going on, like in that moment. But when they come back, it's not going to be anywhere near suspenseful or tense because you haven't built it back up. You're going to have to almost rebuild it before you can put the players back into the game and say, okay, now go. Okay, so you always have to do that with your games as part of the recap as well, which is you need to rebuild the mood and the atmosphere from where the players were at. Because if the players aren't re-engaged with the mood and the atmosphere, then the players are still miles away from where you want them to be to come back into the game. So that, I guess that'll be the last point, and I'm glad I just thought of it there, which is you do in addition to the detailed recap of what happened, you need to rebuild the mood to where the players were to refocus them in that situation. But anyways, that's going to wrap up the episode here this week. And again, sorry, there's not going to be an episode next week. There'll be a little bit of a delay, but we'll be back with the episodes there. I am hoping again to get some more people on the podcast here when we come back. When I'm back from my trip, maybe I'll get some people on some Zoom calls, and I'll record a couple podcasts with some other GMs as well. And if this is sort of a duplicate episode, sorry, but hopefully it sort of reiterates this problem and gives you some more details. Go ahead and let me know about your problems with it. Has this ever killed a game for you? Has this ever, how have you dealt with the challenge of, an inconsistent schedule? levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, the podcast is on YouTube, so smash the like button on YouTube. The podcast is usually, just so you know, is usually about a week delayed on YouTube. I usually release the episodes about a week after. So this could be out till much, much later. But anyways, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, review the podcast, recommend it to a friend, recommend it to your gaming group, especially maybe we need another GM to step up to the plate. This podcast can help, I hope. But anyways, that's going to wrap us up for the week. So have a great week, everyone.